this video, Stephen C. Myers is exposing some of the most commonly held views or arguments within atheism, and he's actually showing how some of their arguments are doing the opposite of what they are intending it to do. And it's actually lending credibility that there is a designing mind behind many of these things that they say there are not. All right, with that being said, let's give it a watch.
So you make a couple of arguments in your two books, Darwin's Doubt as well as Signature in the Cell. One is a DNA-related argument, one is a fossil record-related argument, but they go back, as you say, to that theory of evolution that suggests that natural selection and genetic mutation are enough alone to lead to the way that life has developed over time. I'm wondering if you can start by spelling out where is the discontinuity with regard to the establishment of life?
Well, the first big discontinuity is the origin of life itself, which is what my first book, Signature in the Cell, addressed. And many people don't realize that Darwin himself never addressed the question of the origin of the first life. He speculated about it in a letter to a friend, but this was not something he addressed in The Origin of Species. He presupposed the existence of the first living cell. And there's a major discontinuity between chemical processes that we observe and what we see in actual living organisms. And it's a complexity gap that's absolutely extraordinary. We've got tiny miniature machines. We have not only the DNA with the digital code in it, but a complex information processing system, and even the simplest living cells on Earth. So that's a big discontinuity. There is a series of discontinuities in the fossil record as we find greater and greater complexity arising over time. One of the big ones that I talked about in Darwin's Doubt was one that bothered Darwin a great deal, which was what we now call the Cambrian explosion, which is the origin of the first major groups of animals in the fossil record. They're attested in the Middle Cambrian in particular, and many groups of animals exemplifying completely new body plans arise in a very narrow window of geologic time, very abruptly, without discernible connection to ancestral precursors in the lower Precambrian strata. And that's one of the big discontinuities in the history of life. There are many others. I've written an article with a German paleontologist, Günter Beckley, about 17 such major discontinuities: the mammalian radiation, the origin of flowering plants, the first winged insects, the first dinosaurs. Most of the major groups of living forms on Earth arise discontinuously. So that's a big deal. The even bigger question, though, that I address in the book is, apart from that discontinuity, which is a puzzle for Darwinism, how would you build those organisms? What process could account for the origin of all that new form, especially now that we know you need information, the information in DNA and from other sources, to build complex new forms of life?
Before we move on to Dr. Myers' next point, what he's doing is he's exposing the discontinuity of the view that many atheists hold, referring to the explanation of the origin of the universe. As he explains, the complexity that we see within living organisms does not show signs of starting from simplicity and working their way to complexity. Many organisms are already complex with no genetic links to other organisms, which implies these evolutionary chains pertaining to origins that atheists say are there is actually broken. So also, I'll attach a full video where he explains something called the combinatorial problem that we see within evolutionary sequences, which gives more credibility to atheists failing in their explanations. And I also did a video of this that I'll put in the end screen. All right, let's go to his next thing.
You know, how the problem with regard to the Big Bang? So a lot of folks have suggested that the Big Bang is not actually the beginning. So there is no in the beginning. There was a prior universe that sucked in on itself and then blew out again. That basically time is eternal and there was no beginning to time necessarily.
Well, there really aren't good cosmological models that eliminate what's called the singularity at the beginning temporally. The standard Big Bang or the inflationary cosmology model both terminate in a definite beginning. There have been a number of developments in theoretical physics that have reinforced that: the singularity theorem of Hawking, Penrose, and Ellis in 1968, and also a theorem independently in physics, the Born-Guth-Vilenkin theorem, that established a beginning. But what people have tried to do, theoretical physicists have tried to do to get around the theistic implications of there being a beginning, is formulating a very abstract model of physics called quantum cosmology. That's where the action is if you want to get around the theistic argument for the existence of God based on the beginning of the universe. And I'm writing about this too. It's really heady stuff, but it's based on an analogy to quantum physics. And some of your listeners and viewers are very smart, so they might know about the weirdness of quantum physics, where particles act like waves and waves act like particles. So there's there's this thing called a wave function that describes all the different places that a particle might be, and then how it might collapse and manifest one particular set of attributes upon an observation. And by analogy, some of the physicists have said, well, maybe the universe came out of a bigger wave function, what they call a universal wave function, where there were all these different possible universes that were existing in what quantum physicists call superposition, sort of existing simultaneously in an abstract mathematical space of possibilities, not as physical reality. And then somehow, some way, all those different possibilities collapsed, and we got a universe like ours, okay? Now, this is a very bizarre thing for a number of reasons. One, they've got a mathematical equation generating a material universe, which is a very not materialistic explanation of things. It's almost, as one of the proponents of this, Alexander Vilenkin, noted, he said, math is an idea that exists in mind. So when we say that the universe came out of a big universal wave function equation, are we really saying that the universe came out of a pre-existing mind? He raises that as a rhetorical question near the end of one of his books, and then simply changes the subject to finish the book. The other crazy thing is that to get that mathematical equation that might explain our universe, you have to solve a prior mathematical equation, and you can't do that without an input of information which comes from the theoretical physicists. So like in those origin of life experiments, they're actually modeling the need for a mind to generate information. And you get this weird conclusion, in the beginning was the Word. You know? So it's very strange. The attempt to get around the theistic implications of the Big Bang have generated other models which themselves have implications that are very theistic.
This is something that John Lennox is very famous for, with his breakdowns of how we can understand the universe. We can understand the complexity of many different things through mathematical equations, but we can only understand that from a mind. So the very inscription that we are reading can only be written by a mind and understood by a mind. So what these scientists are overlooking is the very fact that the universe and the generation of the universe, they are using mathematical equations to try and figure these things out, which does imply a mind. So to that, I will say, welcome to intelligent design.